Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're thrilled to have you here tonight. Before we begin, let's take a moment to get everyone settled in. Please take your seats and let's get comfortable. Once again, may we request everyone to please settle down, for we are about to begin with our program. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, may we request everyone to kindly settle down, for we are about to begin with our program. Thank you. Once again, before we finally begin with our program, we would like to request everyone to kindly settle down. Thank you very much. Once again, we would like to request everyone to kindly settle down, for we are now about to begin with our program. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Grand Hyatt Manila for this year's The Manila Dialogue for South China Sea. For us to begin, may we request on stage the President and the CEO of the We Protect Our Seas Foundation, Dr. Jeffrey Ordaniel, for the agenda setting.
All right. National Security Advisor, Secretary Eduardo Año, Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin, Admiral Ronnie Hill Gavan, Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Philippines, welcome to the Manila Dialogue on the South China Sea. Advancing a rules-based maritime order. That is once again our collective focus in the next 2 days. The reason is clear, or is as clear today as it was when we first gathered here last year. Day after day, in the South China Sea, the rule of law is eroding, and we must not look away. I understand some may have reservations on the main thrust of this dialogue. Rules-based order sounds overused, abstract, so cliche. Perhaps others want to talk about newer concepts being introduced in some policy circles, like multipolar international order, whatever that means. Others perhaps are more interested in framing great power competition as the defining narratives of our time. But why do we persist on the theme of rules-based maritime order in this dialogue? At his address at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore last year, President Marcos of the Philippines emphasized, and I quote, "Any effort to resolve maritime differences must be anchored on international law, particularly UNCLOS." The year before then, at the same dialogue, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of Australia said this: "If one nation imagines itself too big for the rules or too powerful to be held to the standards that the rest of us respect, then our region's strategic stability is undermined and our individual national sovereignty is eroded." At the ASEAN-Japan summit last week in Kuala Lumpur, Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi Sanae told her ASEAN counterparts that any unjust maritime claims and activities that are not based on UNCLOS cannot be accepted. Japan consistently supports the rule of law at sea. At the UN Security Council in 2021, Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham said that the policies, regulations, and conduct of states at sea must be in line with international law, especially the UN Charter and UNCLOS 1982. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim of Malaysia, before assuming the chairship of ASEAN last year, said that his country is committed to peacefully resolving disputes in the South China Sea based on international law, including the 1982 UNCLOS. Lastly, President Xi Jinping of China, 2 months ago, at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Plus meeting, said this: "We should abide by international rule of law. The purposes and the principles of the UN Charter and other universally recognized basic norms of international relations must be observed comprehensively, fully, and in their entirety." Yes, she said that. I could go on and on, but you get the point. We have their endorsement. Nearly every statement about the South China Sea, from presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers, cites the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. And it's worth underscoring this. All claimant states to the South China Sea are parties to this convention. But here's the thing. We are not just parties. We helped create it. Through difficult, drawn-out negotiations, through principled compromises that are being undermined today. Let me cite just one of those historic compromises, the regime of the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. Back in the 1970s, I'm sure you know this already, especially those who are maritime experts, but just for the sake of our audience watching online, the world was divided into two during the UNCLOS negotiation. On the one side stood the great maritime powers, determined to preserve freedom of the seas. On the other were the developing countries, then called the Third World, that wanted a fairer share of the oceans, who feared that if freedom of the seas remained absolute, the powerful would take all the resources, oil, gas, fish, long before the poorer nations even had the chance to develop. It was one of the People's Republic of China's first major negotiations at the UN. At that time, China stood with the developing world. It championed a compromise, the idea of the EEZ. The great powers retained freedom of navigation, while developing states gained sovereign rights over the living and non-living resources over a more expansive 200 nautical miles from their shores. I wonder if that was called win-win during that time. But that was just one of the many hard-fought compromises that gave life to the rule of law at sea, a treaty born of cooperation, equity, and respect for law. So if someone says international law is just a Western creation, UNCLOS is proof that that is false. So there is no reason why we cannot once again turn to UNCLOS provisions, to its principles and procedures to resolve our disputes today. As I noted last year when we conceptualized this dialogue, our aim was to create not just another forum. Some of you came from the South China Sea Conference in Vietnam, but a policy-shaping platform, one that brings together practitioners, scholars, and policymakers in an open, substantive, and actionable exchange. We wanted to move beyond endless repetition of talking points and instead clarify in concrete terms what a rules-based order truly means for our region, for the South China Sea, and how we can defend it together. As in the previous years, our goal over the next 2 days is to hold an honest, straightforward conversations on how to sustain the rule of law in the South China Sea. The agenda we have is designed to be interactive. We encourage all participants to speak plainly, avoiding unnecessary jargons or abstractions. Let's keep our discussions real, specific, and actionable, because policymakers, maritime practitioners, and citizens across the world will be following these proceedings. Now, let me take this opportunity to introduce the lead organization, just very briefly, in charge of this dialogue. Since we met last year, WPS has grown in both reach and purpose. Let me just mention 3 international efforts. First, we have established a regional network of marine scientists, coral reef experts, and biologists to deepen the link between science and maritime policy. Our expert working group on marine scientific research and marine environmental protection convened its first workshop in Tokyo this past June, bringing together experts from the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand. In August, we brought them to the South China Sea to conduct test expedition around Half Moon Shoal. They reached the shoal, but weather was not cooperative. Nevertheless, they were able to build their networks, complement their respective expertise, and will be going again early next year, weather permitting. These efforts are only beginning. More joint research projects and field expeditions are being prepared, and we will be counting on your support as we expand the scientific and policy network. For many decades, marine scientific research has been identified by many dialogues and meetings at the Track 1, Track 1.5, and Track 2 levels as a potent confidence-building measure among claimant states. We are making it a reality. Second, with the full support of Secretary Eduardo Año and the National Security Council of the Philippines, WPS has been designated as the new home of the Philippine Secretariat and Committee for the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia-Pacific. Since 1993, CSCAP has served as the region's premier Track 2 forum, where scholars, retired officials, and policy experts meet in their private capacities to address political and security challenges and help inform the agenda of ASEAN Regional Forum. Finally, earlier this year, we convened the inaugural Dialogue on ASEAN Maritime Security, where we gathered maritime policymakers, practitioners, and thought leaders to discuss the state of the region's maritime security. We hope to convene a second round at an ASEAN capital next year. Now, before I exit the stage, allow me to recognize our principal partner institutions that have made this dialogue possible. The National Security Advisor, of course, and his team at the National Security Council, the Philippine Coast Guard, the West Philippine Sea Transparency Office, headed by Commodore J. Tariela, whose vision and commitment to transparency at sea gave birth to this dialogue, to Konrad Adenauer Foundation, especially to its country director, Daniela Braun, for the generous support you have provided. Let me also recognize the Secretary General of Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Dr. Max Spike, who flew all the way from Germany. Thank you so much, sir. To our partners in the diplomatic community, in particular the British Embassy Manila and His Majesty's Ambassador to the Philippines, Her Excellency Sarah Hulton. The Australian Embassy in the Philippines, Ambassador Mark Ince Brown. Also, special thanks to the Canadian Embassy and Ambassador David Hartman. The US Embassy and the very hard-working Ambassador Mary Kay Carlson. The Japanese Embassy and Ambassador Endo Kazuya. The United Nations Office for Drugs and Crime, or UNODC, that sponsored the travels of Coast Guard delegations from Southeast Asia. Thank you very much. Other major partners, the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, represented here tonight by their Vice President for Research and Strategy, Ms. Vina Najibullah. The Japan Foundation Manila, the Yokosuka Council for Asia Pacific Studies, or YCAPS, Sasakawa Peace Foundation, the Cannon Institute for Global Studies that brought here Professor Kanehara Atsuko, the Pacific Forum, and to everyone who trusted us and believed in our cause. Thank you so much. Again, welcome to the Manila Dialogue on the South China Sea.
Thank you, sir. And now, it is my distinct honor to introduce to you our keynote speaker this evening, retired Chief Justice of the Philippines, and now serving as Executive Secretary, speaking on behalf of President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr., the Honorable Lucas P. Bersamin.
Thank you. Thank you. Secretary Año, Dr. Jeffrey Ordaniel, President and CEO of WPS Foundation, the Excellencies from the Diplomatic Corps, my fellow workers in government, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. A good evening to all. It is my distinct honor to join you at this year's Manila Dialogue on the South China Sea on behalf of President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. The President believes that this dialogue embodies our shared hope for a peaceful, prosperous, and stable region, attainable only through respect for the rule of law, cooperation, and collaboration. Allow me now to deliver the President's message. A pleasant day to all. At this second Manila Dialogue on the South China Sea, we gather once more with conviction that peace, stability, and the rule of law must never just be an option in our maritime region, but rather these must always prevail. The South China Sea gives life to the Indo-Pacific region. Trillions of dollars in trade traverse its waters. It nourishes millions through its fisheries, connects economies, and sustains ecosystems whose richness are unmatched. Yet, this lifeline is threatened by illegal activities, excessive claims, overexploitation, and environmental degradation. The 2016 South China Sea Arbitral Award brought legal clarity and finality to long-standing issues in our maritime region. It reaffirmed that peace and justice can only prevail when the rule of law, as embodied in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, or UNCLOS, guides the conduct of nations. For the Philippines, our path has been and will remain clear. We will never waver in our commitment to international law and the resolution of differences through peaceful means. The South China Sea, after all, is the heritage of all. It is a shared artery of global commerce, food security, energy, and environmental balance. Yet we understand that the concerns we face in this modern age continually and rapidly evolve. Technology and tactics have become more complex, even as transparency and accountability have come to the fore. To this end, the Philippines relies on several peaceful, dynamic approaches to address these challenges. First, our adherence to and advancement of international law, particularly UNCLOS and the 2016 Arbitral Award. These will continue to be the twin anchors of the Philippines' policy and actions in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea, as we continue to uphold the sanctity of the rule of law in the maritime domain. In fact, the Philippines cites UNCLOS as the legal framework for all maritime activities and the cornerstone of global ocean governance. We also call on states to comply with decisions rendered through its compulsory dispute settlement mechanisms and respect the advisory opinions that provide legal clarity. We likewise steadfastly adhere to the frameworks within UNCLOS that protect the marine environment and ensure its sustainable use, thereby equating sustainability and prosperity as complementary. Second, keeping lines of communication open with China and other ASEAN claimant states, maximizes bilateral and regional mechanisms, ensuring our continuous peaceful relations. Our diplomacy will continue to firmly protest and disagree where it is right, but also to cooperate and communicate where it is practical and beneficial for the country. Third, we leverage alliances and partnerships, as well as maintain the energy of multilateralism. If we can engage our hardest relationships, then surely we can produce effective strategic outcomes with our allies, partners, and other like-minded countries. This administration is constantly looking to foster multilateral and bilateral engagements that bolster our positions and broaden our capacities. These demonstrate that the Philippines does not stand alone and can rely on its partnerships to maintain regional peace and security. Fourth, but certainly not the least, our utilization of effective diplomacy enhances capacity building of our agencies and offices. This has already directly contributed to the Philippines' efforts to improve our maritime domain awareness, capabilities, and responses. The brave and skilled men and women of our armed forces, Coast Guard, Maritime Police, BIFAR, and other essential services are better equipped, better prepared, and better capable to fulfill their duties and take on the challenges that may lie ahead. These efforts are driven by our commitment to international law and the assertion of our sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdiction. It is also anchored on our duty to protect and preserve the maritime environment as well as uplift the lives of those who depend most on the ocean and the seas, specifically our coastal communities and our fisher folk. Their welfare is the true measure of maritime peace. It is indeed my hope that we can work together to ensure their safe access to traditional fishing grounds and create mechanisms that protect their rights and livelihoods. While this dialogue aims to address our pressing challenges, I hope that it will also deepen trust, strengthen cooperation, and renew solidarity among all nations of the Indo-Pacific. Together, let us ensure that the rule of law endures as the anchor of peace, stability, and shared prosperity in our seas and beyond. Thank you so much. Mabuhay kayong lahat. That concludes the message of His Excellency President Marcos. On my part as the Executive Secretary, I look forward to stronger partnerships, more comprehensive dialogues, and more strategic policies that will emerge from this gathering. Rest assured that our public and private sectors will engage in shared endeavors that champion the welfare of the Filipino people. Thank you so much and good evening.
Thank you very much, Honorable Lucas Bersamin. We are grateful for this opportunity to be joined by the Executive Secretary, and we thank the Executive Secretary for his time and presence. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to Executive Secretary Honorable Lucas Bersamin. This time, ladies and gentlemen, dinner is served. For the information of everybody, the opening panel will begin at 7:20 p.m. Once again, the opening panel will begin at 7:20. There will be a lively conversation featuring experts from all South China Sea claimant states, China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei. For the meantime, let us all enjoy our dinner. Once again, the opening panel will begin at 7:20. There will be a lively conversation featuring experts from all South China Sea claimant states, China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, while we all still enjoy our dinner. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the opening panel. This fireside chat brings together thought leaders from all claimant states to reflect candidly on what has worked, what has not, and what must change. It will examine persistent themes, the challenge of ensuring continuity and follow-through, and the importance of linking scientific, environmental, and legal initiatives to real policy outcomes. May we now invite our panelists on stage, starting off with the chair, the Director of Research, Pacific Forum, Honolulu, Mr. Brad Glosserman. We also have the Senior Fellow, Asia Program, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Ms. Elena Noor. Next is the Director, Marine Studies Center Grandview Institution, Beijing, Captain Xiao Bu Liu. We also have the Commander, West Philippine Sea Transparency Group of the Philippine Coast Guard, Commodore J. Tariela. Next, the Research Fellow, the Max Planck Foundation for International Peace and the Rule of Law, Ms. Pham Ngoc Min Trong. And the Assistant Lecturer, University Brunei Darussalam, Dr. Hafiz Hashim. Mr. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening. It is a pleasure to be here entertaining you through your dinner. And it will be more entertaining as long as you keep my glass full. It is a delight to be back at the South China Sea Dialogue. It's especially, I'd like to thank Jeff for having us. Congratulations on the program, on the growth of your organization. It is a delight to be here with this very distinguished panel, several folks of whom are old friends, and I'm really happy to see. And I am especially excited to be able to hopefully kind of facilitate a conversation among them. And apart from the remarks that I'm about to make, just to get us started, I hopefully will not be saying too much today and just kind of pointing at people and giving them a hard time. I'll spare you the introductions. We know who they are. They've just been given to you. Essentially what I just want to do explain how this is going to go. I see this as being a real scene setter, given the title of this particular session, and a way of kind of framing the conversation that's going to unfold over the next couple of days. I see this very much as a conversation. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to take some questions from you as our hour winds down, and I'm told we only have an hour. I ask the panelists, please, we're going to keep this informal. Keep your comments brief, a minute or two. No one has prepared remarks. Since we're all here speaking in our private capacities, I would ask that you keep, in the spirit of what Jeff outlined, keep it informal, keep it a personable dialogue, and I hope that we will be able to probe some issues, explore some of the basic questions that have surrounded these particular issues, and hopefully disagree with each other and do it in a way that's not disagreeable. So I urge all of you to think and hopefully expand the boundaries of what is a traditional conversation about these topics. And so with that, I told Colonel Yu I was going to put him on the spot and start out being in the middle, as you are. But as the presentation that Dr. Daniel made at the beginning a few minutes ago suggested that everyone understands that international law is so important, and we all agree on its centrality to this problem. So what's the problem? Why are we still having this conversation, and why have we dealt with South China Sea issues for 3 decades? Colonel Yu?
Maybe I cannot answer that because this month and there's many and conference hosted in the Southeast Asia. Then this week and there's a conference hosted in the Hanoi in Vietnam, and today there's a conference hosted in Manila, and next week there's a conference hosted in the Myanmar in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. So all these in the conference will discuss and international law and apply to the South China Sea. And but as you know, China is in history a land power and not a sea power. And when we talk about the international law, especially on the UNCLOS, and there are many different interpretations about some article. So maybe some difference about this interpretation will lead in the dispute how to define the international law. And just my personal view is very simple, and maybe it's just lasting the very long time, and we didn't find a way to apply international law to the South China Sea.
Ms. Tran, as a lawyer.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will answer your question in 2 approaches. Now, because we have the Law of the Sea Convention, which is considered as the constitution of the ocean. But the problem with the Law of the Sea Convention is that it was negotiated by diplomats and it is interpreted by the lawyers. 2 of them are very complicated people. So that's the first problem. It leads to very different ways of interpretation, and the wording in the convention is relatively vague in order to get the consensus of more than 100 countries in the world. That's the first problem. The second problem of the law of the sea is that it's complicated with the interaction of different legal regimes. Like the Law of the Sea Conventions, the treaty regimes, and then we also have general principle of international law, we also have customary of international law, and the interaction between those regimes are not fully developed by international courts and tribunal. That's why we have the South China Sea case, where we understand the interaction between general international law and treaty laws. But which related to customary international law and other regimes is still developing. Thank you.
So, Commodore, is this a legal problem?
Thank you, Brad. Why do you have to change the question when you're pointing at me already? I think there's no problem about the interpretation of the international law. Everybody, if you can ask anyone about the provisions about the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, all of us would agree on the articles and for each part of the UNCLOS. But the problem in the South China Sea is not all about the interpretation. As I said, it is as clear as the sky. it is not subject to your own personal interpretation. The problem in the South China Sea, the reason why there is an escalation of tension, it's because there are some countries who choose to interpret it differently. They have an alternative interpretation of each provision of each articles in UNCLOS. And at the same time, it is also coupled with their own capability, whether economically, whether militarily, and that is the problem. If you believe on your own interpretation without actually respecting the provisions of international law, that would definitely result to the escalation of tension.
Elena, from your perspective, both as a Malaysian living in Washington, D.C., how do you see all of this?
I've been trying to stay away from the South China Sea issue, not very successfully. I keep getting drawn back into it, and I've fortunately been involved in these sorts of conversations for far too long, you know, Brad. But I think to disagree, agreeably, slightly, I think there is an interpretation, yourself pointed this out, that different countries interpret international law. The other issue, I think, is that there is an enforcement challenge. So even if we have the 2016 arbitral tribunal decision, and you can say that that is, to a large extent, the final word, we don't have an enforcement mechanism in order to bring that decision to life.
Thanks. I think, it always strikes me that when we have a problem that's been festering for decades, as this one has, it's very clear that sort of the traditional thinking isn't solving the problem. And so, Elena, I'm going to come back to you later, precisely as someone who is not working on this, to hopefully bring an outside perspective to this. It's very clear to me that we need new thinking, and we need to try to find new places for common ground, and agreement and consensus on ways to work this through. So, I guess, Dr. Hashim, would you, from your perspective, where do you see these issues arising?
All right. So, first of all, thank you. Okay, I think that when we talk about the South China Sea, maybe the international law, we should actually see it not just as the do-all, be-all kind of thing. Maybe it's just a starting ground, right? To anchor us to go towards a more proactive diplomacy. So that's just the basic foundation. And then after that, we can actually look into the anchoring of the law towards specific issues, like for instance on fisheries, or talking about the marine resources, or talking about the biodiversity problems that's recurring in the region. And when we talk, you know how the South China Sea is the sea for all, you know. So protecting that means that we should talk to the people, not just like Sean was saying, the diplomats and the lawyers that's connecting on the law, basically.
Am I hearing the panelists suggesting that there's a real tension here between the legal regime, if you will, and the diplomacy surrounding all of these issues? Is that one possible way to look at that? It seems like sort of what you're saying.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Is there a tension between the legal regimes that we're using as the diplomatic foundation and then the diplomacy itself?
I think not tension is quite a harsh word, but maybe more so towards there's some form of friction. Well, kind of thing.
That's nicer than tension?
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, yes, I think there's some form of a problem in that sense, where the legal and the diplomats do not actually see an eye to eye on how should we interpret the international law.
Colonel Yu, care to weigh in?
Yes, and would I just mention one thing, and the core issue of the South China Sea dispute, not only is maritime law, is just the core is a dispute of the island territorial sovereignty, and you know, the UNCLOS, the contemporary in the law of the sea, there's then the maritime right come from the land. If we just discuss then the maritime dispute and just didn't mention about the land, island territorial dispute, I don't think we find the real way to solve the dispute. And so, and when we talk about the South China Sea issue, we didn't want to come from the an international law to solve all these issues. And all these island territorial dispute must solved by some bilateral country. But you know that there are many islands not only overlapped by two countries and multilateral. So all these in the island territorial dispute maybe not only come from the law of the sea can solve that problem.
How is it that we overlay, as you put it, these bilateral disputes into what is very clearly a multilateral cauldron? The South China Sea is a Southeast Asian issue. It is one that's being addressed in the Code of Conduct by ASEAN as well. So it strikes me that there's a second level of tension here. How is it that we can kind of resolve that? Or is ASEAN offering a venue to discuss and otherwise address these concerns? Dr. Chang?
I think the sound system is not really clear, but I try to pick up as much as I understand from your question, because you put some keywords as ASEAN and the Code of Conduct. And now, because I'm a legal researcher, so I look everything from the legal perspective. So South China Sea is not a problem of 5 countries, 5 claimants, and China. It's this problem of ASEAN as a whole. Why? Because you look at ASEAN Charter, especially Article 2 and Article 1, it says that ASEAN has the responsibilities as a whole to protect the peace, security, and stability of ASEAN region. And South China Sea is the ASEAN region. Therefore, the problem of the South China Sea, from the legal perspective, is the problem of ASEAN. For the second point I want to make is about the Code of Conduct. So there's many point of view concerning the procedures of negotiating the Code of Conduct. But if you look at ASEAN and the perspective of ASEAN when negotiate the Code of Conduct, every negotiation must be based on the Law of the Sea Convention, must be based on UNCLOS. And when you look in various joint statement, chain statement of ASEAN since 1992, the Law of the Sea Convention considered as the legal framework based on which all activity at sea must carry out. So I think for the negotiation of the Code of Conduct, the Law of the Sea Convention is the starting point.
Commodore, as a Filipino and you hear ASEAN is entering the room, does that fill you with hope? Does that...
You know, I came from a South China Sea conference in Vietnam, and there's this, I won't mention the nationality of one of the panel members that I had. And he said that the Philippines is the only country in Southeast Asia who is standing up against China in the entire South China Sea. He admitted the fact that among the Southeast countries, it is only the Philippines who is standing up against bullying and lawful activities of the People's Republic of China. So your question is, how can we have ASEAN to consider this no security challenge if the Philippines will only be one, all alone, exposing the Chinese aggression? I think I agree with our Vietnamese friend. The problem with South China Sea is that all the countries in South Asia, I think the main problem the South China Sea, particularly in Asia, is that we fail to understand really how are we going to respond with the unlawful and aggressive action of one country that jeopardizes the regional security in ASEAN. We are always left with two options, whether we're just going to ignore Chinese aggression or we're going to respond. And for so many years already, the ASEAN regional countries would just choose to ignore. And unfortunately, fortunately, under this administration for President Marcos, we choose to expose. We're not responding, we're not provoking anybody. We're just telling the world that there is unlawful activities that are happening in the South China Sea, neither ignoring nor responding. And for other Southeast Asian countries to realize that, I think that is something that we can have as a first step. It's because it is unfortunate that when we choose to be transparent about the South China Sea, although we think about the regional security, people have this wrong notion that it's only the Philippines that is only being subjected to harassment and unlawful activities. But to be fair with our Brunei, Vietnamese, Malaysian friends, they are all aware that whatever harassment that we are experiencing within our own exclusive economic zone, it's pretty much the same. Ray Powell has always been using his social media platform to expose all those incursions within their own exclusive economic zone. The problem is, when is ASEAN also going to do the same?
Alina's been educating me about the ways of ASEAN for decades now. Is that a fair characterization? Commodore's characterization?
I think there are several layers to unpack. One, I can completely understand the frustration that's been voiced by the Commodore and the Philippines in general. I think, though, that every country has chosen to respond to various levels and intensities of harassment in their own way, and that might not be satisfactory for the Philippines or for other countries. But I think to say that the problem has been ignored might be a little unfair to some of these countries and the efforts behind the scenes. For now, the Philippines has had probably the most confrontations with China. And I think there is a sentiment that the Philippines is unfairly sharing this burden or carrying this burden on behalf of the other ASEAN claimants. The other layer to this, of course, is that, as our Vietnamese colleague said, this is not an ASEAN-China issue. This is also an intra-ASEAN overlap. And so we have amongst ourselves, within the ASEAN claimant family, our own unresolved disputes and delimitation exercises that need to be carried out. Those have not been resolved completely. I mean, to be honest, like Malaysia and the Philippines, we still have issues in terms of our borders. Thirdly, I feel that there might be a way forward within ASEAN. It has taken a long time. It will probably continue to take a long time, and the COC that's supposed to be completed next year, hopefully, will probably not be to the satisfaction of everyone. But in the meantime, I think what ASEAN needs to be aware of is that there have been evolutions in the nature of threats and challenges in the South China Sea beyond just the maritime domain. Because what we've seen is not just harassment on the water, we've also seen harassment in the airspace, we've seen some operations in cyberspace, and all these things need to be taken into account comprehensively. So I'll just pause there.
Sure. By the way, to each of the panelists, if there's ever you'd like to just jump in, you don't have to wait for me to call on you. This is not school. But go ahead.
All right. I think talking about from a Bruneian perspective or a small state perspective, right? So yes, I do agree that, with Ailina when she was saying that the Philippines is anchoring the burden of ASEAN as a whole. But at the same time, that does not mean that Brunei practicing its quiet diplomacy means that it's indifferent. So we've always been a steady and a reliable partner to all ASEAN partners, as well as to China or the US and the UK. the fact that they've been harassing or quote unquote been active in the Brunei waters does not mean that we should have our megaphones or mega speakers saying that they're harassing in our water. But to be more proactive in a diplomatic channel via quiet diplomacy, and then basically practicing what the ASEAN does best with the mushawara and the muafakat kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. May I? I just want to clarify that maybe you just mentioned that the China is aggressive or a bully to Philippines. But from Chinese policy, and I think from the 2012, and China didn't do some very more aggression or operation in the South China Sea. Because all this status quo from Chinese side is maintained. There's no more island building, and there's no more island occupation. But from the Philippine side, there's more and more military exercise with the US, with Japan, with the Australian foreigner. Just 1 year, that 500 times military joined the exercise with the US in the Philippines. Wow, it's a huge number. And if you trace the US surveillance and reconnaissance airplane in the South China Sea, I can tell you the 1 year is 1,200 times. So all this operation, I don't think can bring the very good atmosphere to solve the South China Sea dispute. And why the Philippines and the extra president, so we have a very good relationship and to solve the dispute and set aside the dispute and just promote the economic development. So why something have changed because 2 years ago. So if we just sitting here tonight to talk about the future to solving the South China Sea dispute, and we must tracing back the history and not just cast China as an adversary.
I want to put a pin. Go ahead.
Thank you, my Chinese friend. But I would like really to thank you because this is your second time to go to Manila Dialogue, right? But, let us first correct some of the statements that you said. Starting 2012 onwards, the Philippines never occupied any maritime features since we signed the 2002 DOC. And let me refresh your history. In 1992, when the US bases left the Philippines, 3 years after that, you took over Mischief Reef. That is the reason why the Estrada administration during that time had run aground a commissioned vessel, BRP Sierra Madre in Ayungin. Because there was also an intelligence report that it's not just in Mischief Reef that you will end your occupation, it will actually crawl in other different maritime features. Fast forward in 2012, there was a standoff when the PLA maritime forces never want the Philippine Navy to arrest your illegal fishermen who are capturing endangered species in Bajo de Masinloc. From 2012 onwards, the Chinese Coast Guard and maritime forces never left there, wherein you continuously and persistently harass Filipino fishermen. You said about data wherein we had a lot of engagement with the United States military, but let me refresh your memory during the time of the former administration. From 2016 to 2022, during the time of the former administration, in his first few days in office, he was not actually a fan of a military exercise with that of the US government. So meaning, there is a substantial decrease of number, if not nil, with our engagement with the US military. But despite of our good intention of sincere diplomacy under President Duterte, going to Xi Jinping, discussing about resolving our disputes, we have been still receiving reports from ordinary Filipino fishermen that they are continuously being harassed. Our supply operations remains to be very difficult for the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and our small Coast Guard vessels which is almost triple the size of a China Coast Guard vessel, is also continuously being bullied since then and now, since during the day one that it was delivered from Japan. The Philippine government has always showed signs of good intentions and good faith. We never provoke anyone. We never wanted to escalate the tension. Coast Guard vessels in the Philippines are so small compared to the Chinese Coast Guard. It is not our intention to provoke the Chinese government.
I want to put a pin. I think you guys, we could all leave this if you have this conversation. Let's try to move around a little bit. I want to come back to the external powers. I want to start again, though, with the ASEAN question. And again, the questions, I think the title is Lessons Learned. And I'm wondering, is there a possibility to go back to the ASEAN feature? Is there a way that perhaps ASEAN could begin to set an example by, as you said, solving some of the they have, use those as building blocks to larger or sub-regional kind of arrangements? Yeah, sure. Start with that one.
Sorry, I asked that. Because some of these issues are so intractable and they hinge on sovereignty and territorial disputes, whatever resolution, if ASEAN is able to reach one, I think will take a long time. And as we all know, ASEAN works at its own pace, it has its own time zone. And so the course of discussions that has been taking place is probably the best that we have right now. Is it the best way forward? No. But I am myself am not sure. I'm thinking this through out loud. I'm not sure how we can unpack so many of these intractable issues, seeing as to how even between ASEAN member states, we haven't resolved our own border disputes. We have very different approaches to the South China Sea, and it's creating a lot of frustration, I can tell, amongst ASEAN itself. And so how do we move forward? I really don't have the answer, and this is why we have been having this conversation over and over again for the past few decades. Not very helpful.
That's not reassuring. I was going to go to that end, so please, Dr. Chang.
Oh, do you want to go
Both
first?
of you.
Yeah.
Both of you.
Thank you for mentioning the dispute among ASEAN countries. And again, looking from the legal perspective, the dispute amongst ASEAN countries in the South China Sea is not complicated. It's not difficult to resolve. It's related to maritime delimitation, growing maritime boundary, and the claim of sovereignty over maritime features in the South China Sea amongst ASEAN member states in the South China Sea is not a problem. In maritime delimitation, we have the technique of enclaves, though maritime feature, and it will not affect the delimitation between mainland of ASEAN country. And if you look into the history of the dispute in South China Sea, ASEAN countries have developed a numbers of treaty concerning maritime boundary among themselves. And if you say that ASEAN countries have different perspectives about the South China Sea dispute, I really invite you to look into the note verbals of ASEAN countries at the Commission on the Continental Shelf at the United Nations. And you can see clearly ASEAN country circles around the South China Sea arbitration and deliver their note verbal based on the decision of the arbitral tribunal in the South China Sea case. So I think they have a really good legal background, really good consensus. And the third point I want to make is, of course, in order to explore and exploit natural resources in the South China Sea, we cannot wait for the maritime boundary to be completely drawn. So there's a beautiful concept called joint development that our Chinese colleagues have already talked about. And if you look at the joint development activity in the South China Sea, the most successful joint developments in the South China Sea is amongst ASEAN countries. And the most successful one is joint development on the resources of gas and oil in the South China Sea between Vietnam and Malaysia.
Hashim, and then we're going to go back to Elena.
All right. I would like to echo that as well. One of the main, and addressing with what Alina was saying as well. So we've always had problems, especially from an inter-ASEAN perspective, right? So we're talking about Brunei and Malaysia. We've already, we kind of solved that in 2006 with the Prime Minister Abdul Badawi and the King with the joint development. So that can be a model, like you mentioned, from the intra-ASEAN and then to work towards the other regional powers to invite to have a joint development in the South China Sea. But now, talking about the ASEAN as a whole, at the very least, process, well, there's usually the word process, not progress, but process is still a progress anyway. Right? The fact that we're still talking, it's still some progress. We might not agree to anything, but it's still a process, and we hope towards moving some progress.
I'm curious for the audience. I've been having this conversation about ASEAN process for a long time. And I know gray hairs like myself, and before I was a gray hair, I heard that and people were happy with that. Are younger ASEAN, whatever the word, representatives or citizens, are you happy with process instead of progress still? I'm just kind of curious. I'd be interested. But Elena, sorry, I want to, you said you wanted to weigh in.
Do I still count as a younger ASEAN member?
That's one of those questions you never answer.
I do think that process is progress, because otherwise what else are we left with? But I wanted to get back to the points about this differentiation between what we observe in the legal realm versus realities, geopolitical realities that occupy domestic political conversations. And here our Vietnamese colleague alluded to this in the very beginning, where we talked about this gap between diplomats and lawyers. Yes, I followed the note verbals and I've followed these discussions at the UN, but the reality is that there are some difficult realities that we need to take into account that sometimes sit very awkwardly alongside some of these legal developments. What sometimes complicates the political and policy approaches in reality at sea. So I just want to highlight that what we see, as someone trained in law, yes, I have these ideals about how the law should be implemented and operationalized, but the reality is very different.
So I'm hearing two different sets, actually, as parts of your comments, that maybe one way to think about lessons learned or way to proceed, apart from putting our faith in process over progress, might be inter-ASEAN discussions, piecemeal solutions. And the second would be something you mentioned earlier, which would be perhaps we could look at discrete issues, as you said it, like under the sea or something, rather than addressing the larger questions of sovereignty and trying to maybe take off little bites like that and seeing if we can come up with solutions that give us purchase for a larger approach. Is that a fair characterization?
Actually, I was suggesting the opposite. I was suggesting we view these dots as interconnected, that we need to take this more comprehensive approach to what's going on in the South China Sea, rather than segmenting these issues. So if we say, oh, this is what's happening out at sea, and this is just the maritime domain, we're not considering some of these overflight type activities over the South China Sea, or we're not looking at some of these cyber operations in and around the South China Sea, then we're missing the bigger picture.
So it gets easier by making it bigger and more complicated.
I'm just suggesting that we view it more holistically, because otherwise we get overly focused on just the same issues.
I think we'd like to revisit that one. But I want to move on to the outside and external powers, because we've talked about this a little bit. And I'm curious among the panelists, as you survey the outside powers, who do you see as having both the biggest roles and the biggest potential roles? We've mentioned the United States. Colonel Yu sees the U.S. as a troublemaker, and Commodore sees Japan as a source of sustenance and support. How else do others characterize outside players, and are we missing anyone? I know I say that with some hope that someone will mention Europe, given that the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is supporting this particular program. But is there a role for Europe? Is there a role for Australia? Or perhaps Canada? What do we see the outside powers like?
All right. I think when we talk about, again, South China Sea is being operated by the whole world, amongst all of the states, right, that's operating in the region. And economically, it's one of the most important trade routes. So, yes, Canada has to have a stake. Australia has to have a stake. Even every other European countries has to have some sort of role in the South China Sea. But you're talking about as a major power, I think the United States cannot be replaced as a maritime player in the region. But at the same time, we do feel that China's economic development is the key towards our own ASEAN development, right? So we cannot just, and I agree with what Elena was saying, you cannot just see it like compartmentalize these issues, because it will always have to be holistic in a sense where even though China is having some sort of disputes with the other claimants, but that does not mean that we should actually penalize China, because there are other areas that we can look into as well. So maybe with the development of like building trust, cooperation and whatnot, maybe we can move even further towards the South China Sea, albeit it's going to be a very long time, but yeah, process, not progress.
Are you suggesting then that the outside powers could perhaps facilitate some of these conversations?
Yeah, I do believe that the outside powers should be able, can facilitate these conversations, because at the end of the day, it's their own national interest that is at stake as well. It's not just within the ASEAN. We're talking about South Korea, for instance, or Japan, right? A lot of their trade routes goes to the South China Sea. So maybe having ASEAN as the regional conductor with the support of the other major powers, that ought to help.
That's sort of the situation we're in now, I think. But Elena, as someone who's within the Beltway most of your life these days, how does it look to you that the United States, is looking at this region and the role it has the opportunity or perhaps will to play? As an outsider, I think that gives you an interesting perspective on developments within the Beltway.
Well, I have to say I'm not in the Beltway anymore, thankfully. But I think, and I'd be interested in perspectives.
We're moving down.
No. Well, I'll just say this. I think it's unwise to put our eggs in one basket, in the Washington basket right now. And I don't think this is an aberration. Yes, the U.S. has been this reliable security partner, to be this reliable security partner for Southeast Asian countries. But I think we've seen some very harsh realities that will continue to persist beyond the next few years of the Trump administration. And I think we have to be very aware that ultimately we in Southeast Asia need to be the primary guarantors of the seas which we front. Whether we have the capabilities to do that, of course, is up to question. But I don't think it is wise for us to count on just one partner, i.e. Washington and the United States in this case, as the ultimate arbiter of our security in the case of harassment.
Commodore?
Well, first of all, I think it's important for us to understand that the Philippines is not putting all our eggs in one basket with the United States. And this is not, the decision of the Philippines to stand up against the aggression of any other country without
You
mentioning.
have to hold it closer.
Without mentioning in particular country, the decision of the Philippine government to stand up for anybody who is violating our sovereignty and sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea is not all about great power competition. It doesn't mean that we're siding with the United States or we're siding with the People's Republic of China. This is not about those kind of choices. It is all about our state agency as a sovereign nation. And looking at the external countries like Canada, Australia, European Union, France, Germany, they are not also supporting the Philippines because we are siding with the United States. I would like to believe that all of these countries, that they were able to deepen their security arrangement with the Philippine government, support the capability development of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Philippine Coast Guard. This is not all because we sided with the United States, but because they support the rules-based order. They support the international law. And that is the reason why we should stop looking at the South China Sea issue as something that is only a result of the great power competition.
Captain Liu, I would guess you're going to disagree with that, huh?
Yes. When we talk about the outer space and outer power, they want to take a very important role in the South China Sea issue, but my personal view is that the South China Sea issue is an issue between our coastal states. Our coastal states have an equal position, not only the ASEAN, just only the China, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. All these coastal states have finally solved this dispute. The outer space and the outer power, US, Japan, Australia, they come, they go, but the problem is still here. All these island disputes, maritime disputes, only can finally solved by our bilateral or multilateral by these coastal states. And how do you think the U.S. will play the role in how to solve the dispute with the Scarborough Shoal between China and the Philippines? I don't think so. I don't think it's a very positive way. Yeah.
John, any comment you want to? It's on.
It works?
Yes.
No, when I think about the outside country conducting activity in the South China Sea, I ask the question, what is the nature of their action? And usually countries like the United States, European countries like Germany and Australia or Japan, they conduct something called freedom of navigation and overflight. And it is the principle of international law respected by all ASEAN countries and even China. So how can a lawful action carried out by state can be considered as a troublemaker? That's the question that I keep asking myself when there's a narrative say that those countries are the troublemaker. But the thing that they do is conducting a lawful activity at sea.
Excellent. We have 13 minutes left. I'm watching. And I think if we have some very brief questions, I'm prepared to entertain them. But you've got to be brief, and please identify. But also, I want to give each of the panelists, you have one, before we conclude, one quick question, which is going to be, for each of you, as we wrap up, I'd like you to give me one lesson that we've learned throughout this last 30 years, or since the last dialogue meeting a year and a half ago, and then one recommendation as to how to proceed. So, questions. Let's take, sir. Do we have a microphone? We do not. This gives you a moment to think. Do we have a second question? I'm going to take a couple. Over in the back. No, you don't have a microphone.
I could also speak really loud.
You can speak louder. Who are you, Ian?
I
The mic.
teach at the National University of Singapore. I'm also a non-resident scholar with Carnegie China. So thanks for the mic. So I'd like to thank Senior Captain Liu for his candor. I note that you said that China chose not to be more aggressive. So with that in mind, I understand Southeast Asia, process not progress, very slow. There's nothing that Southeast Asian states and ASEAN can do with more assertive PRC. So in that light, you're also talking about the US perhaps having less of a role. What can you sort of convince us of PRC restraint? What can the PRC do to credibly restrain itself from pushing ahead, because it frankly can?
Great. Don't answer that. We have a question back over in the corner. Give the microphone to him, please, sir. If you can, identify who the question is directed to. Back over there. Hand up. Thank you. 2 more questions. Identify if it goes to someone. Each of you figure out if you'd like to answer it, and then we'll go back. Sir.
Thank you. Ristian Suprianto from the University of Indonesia. My question relates to the COC negotiations. We understand that there are so many aspirations with regards to how COC should look like, and I think at the lower base it can be just a confidence-building measure document, a DOC, a declaration of conduct with another name. Basically, it has no enforcement provisions whatsoever. But on the other hand, some parties want a more legally binding COC, very detailed and very much enforceable. I would like to ask the panelists, what kind of, all panelists actually, consensus aside, what kind of an ideal COC would you envisage that we can adopt? Thank you.
Great. There was a question right behind you.
Thank you. Waman, formerly from Lowy Institute. I'm now based in Abu Dhabi. Just a quick question, 2 questions. One question. Okay. One for the China's representative on the stage. ASEAN and China has been talking to each other for 35 years since 1990, but as they talk, China keep building military bases in the South China Sea. So based on my conversation with ASEAN defense and intelligence officials, there is a strategic mistrust from within ASEAN against China. How can then China build strategic trust with ASEAN member states? Thank you.
Captain Liu, that one's for you. And then there's one more person who had a hand up behind. There's a woman in the back, and we have to have a woman ask the question.
Good evening, Dr. Natalie Samby, Executive Director of Earth Research. My question is for the whole panel. We are at a very elite event. We have diplomatic representation. We often have conversations amongst government officials and think tankers, which is the nature of what we do. How can we better incorporate the voices at the grassroots level, at community level, from people who are actually impacted by these events in the water and on the ground? Thank you.
Great. We'll go back to the panelists. Each of you answer whichever you would wish. And brief, please.
All right. To Natalie's question, I really like that. So talking about how can the grassroots be heard, I think we should actually move towards the ASEAN people-orientedness and then institutionalizing the inclusiveness towards the grassroots, talking about from the multilateral perspective, because as ASEAN is trying to move forward from the elite-centric, I think at the end of the day, it's the people that has the capacity towards moving what policy matters, especially on the ground.
Let me answer the question on the COC from the legal perspective. It's very easy. In the law, it's very straightforward. It's binding or non-binding. So DOC is non-binding. COC had to be binding to make a difference. That's my answer.
Yes, and I just read the report about the summary of the South China Sea Conference hosted by Vietnam, and someone very negative and future about the COC. But as I think the Premier Li Qiang and the Wang Yi have mentioned, the China supports the sign COC in the 2026, and I think that's the commitment in the consensus by very superior policy making. And I don't know the detail about the COC, but I think as finally when we sign that and as a binding, the legal binding, I think it's supported by the China with ASEAN, the more than 10 countries. Sorry, I didn't get the answer about the China with the ASEAN and the how his question about the China with the ASEAN relation.
He asked how can we prove that China will not become more aggressive if there are no outside country coming?
Oh yes, and I don't think the China's the policy is just the kick off all the foreign sea power out of the South China Sea. And until right now, the China didn't want to the U.S., Japan, Australia, some great sea power, just putting in a very negative factor or put the atmosphere is very negative to solve the South China Sea dispute. As China want to solve this dispute, land, island dispute, maritime dispute, just a bilateral negotiation and multilateral negotiation with some coastal states. Not there's no room for the outside sea power just to participate on this negotiation of the dispute. I think that's a Chinese policy.
I would like to respond to the question about my aspiration for the Code of Conduct. I'd like to support the Vietnamese friend. I think it's important for us to have a COC that can be binding to all the signatory states. Otherwise, it will just be like the arbitral award, wherein some people would say it cannot be enforced. So if we're going to come up with a COC that will hold anybody accountable if you choose to violate it, I think that's the most effective way that we can be able to maintain regional peace in the South China Sea.
+1 on the legally binding COC. Natalie, I love your question. I think it's really important to collect voices on the ground that are most impacted, directly impacted by what's going on in the South China Sea. And to that effect, I agree that this people-oriented, people-centered ASEAN needs to be brought alive, perhaps in this case, by having a regularized reporting mechanism of incidents on the ground and having institutionalized consultations with the fisher folk, as well as the local communities and the coastal states that front the South China Sea. So some form of regularized, institutionalized consultation mechanism.
Consultation and transparency, it sounds like. Great, let's go back again. Now I'm going to answer my question. One lesson, one recommendation.
Okay, one lesson. Despite the ideals of international law, I think the reality is that international law is ultimately elastic, and that's why there are different interpretations. We see this not just in the South China Sea, we've seen this in many other instances involving international law and its complete violations of it. Recommendation, I think we should pay more attention. I've been hopping this point. We should pay more attention to what's happening comprehensively with regard to the South China Sea. So not just what happens in the maritime domain, but what happens in the other domains as well.
Well, for the one lesson, I think we need to recognize that for us to be able to work on the regional peace and security is that for everybody to understand its responsibility to the treaties that we sign. The power of the international law can just be ignored if we are not going to be responsible to stand up for it. For the recommendation, having this kind of track 1.5 dialogue, not just here in the Philippines, but even in other parts of ASEAN, is very important. Because through this kind of dialogue, we can present our facts. Even if you're going to present your lies, the audience will be able to counter that. And the problem with the disinformation and fake news is really tremendous right now. So if we're going to have more track 1.5 dialogue, wherein we can bring along expert communities, the academic, the civil society, and the diplomat, we can already tell what is the truth and that there is no alternative for the truth. Thank you.
Yeah, I have. I just want to mention the one lesson. The UNCLOS is very important and for all the country. But you must know the UNCLOS is nothing about the island disputes and sovereignty. If we were to try to solve the dispute with the Scarborough Shoal and the Spratly Island, we didn't find article in the UNCLOS. That's one point. The second is UNCLOS is just comprised of a member of 119 members and 160 members. And so the South China Sea is very distinguished. We didn't find any very specific article to solve the problem of the South China Sea issue. As the 1982 UNCLOS signed, the half a decade, half a century have passed, and almost some issues have changed. We must get the development of the UNCLOS or some article. So, yes, we must just based on the UNCLOS, but we must find some bilateral or multilateral treaty in the South China Sea.
Recommendation?
By the coastal states, yeah.
Your recommendation?
Recommendation is that we must find some bilateral or multilateral treaty by the coastal state to solve the South China Sea disputes.
Okay. Dr. Chen?
One recommendation, don't let diplomats negotiate international treaty alone. They will make things complicated. And recommendation is that with respect to international dispute, listen to the lawyers. They will make things easier.
This entire table are diplomats.
I would love to get a more general response to that recommendation. The last word.
All right. Very interesting. I think when we talk about one recommendation that I should think is strengthening the institutions, especially within the ASEAN bloc. So at the end of the day, we cannot avoid going through or without the ASEAN as a unitary. But of course, it's going to be more headaches than what meets the eye. But yeah, strengthening the institution from the ASEAN, I think, is the main recommendation.
That's your lesson?
One lesson is that we should actually move forward from capacity building to more institutionalization.
Okay. I was told I have 1 hour. It's been exactly 1 hour. Please join me in thanking these panelists. And I hope you all had a good dinner, and I hope it was sufficiently entertaining. And now, well, whatever desserts, I guess. Thank you.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Let us thank our panelists for those insightful discussions. Once again, let's give them a big, big round of applause. Once again, thank you very much, sirs and ma'ams. And that concludes our program for tonight. Just a reminder for everybody, please be back here tomorrow in the same venue at 8:30 in the morning. Once again, at 8:30 in the morning. Once again, thank you very much to those who come, to everyone here on board, and let us all enjoy the rest of the night.